We about to. Give me a second, bro. 1 second. I'll roll that any day, you know. Shoot. That, $17 ain't bad.
I mean, and you can get
Local TV.
you can get local TV.
Yeah, because movies you can pull that up on, you know, on something else.
And then I like to watch CBS News in the morning.
Yeah.
And then they give you the local
News
for
and all that.
and the weather and
For the
stuff
area.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like watching Price is Right.
Same here. Yep. I think I got my tea. What's up? I got my tea. Yeah, peace to everybody. Ready to get this started, a little film session started. I like to teach in all different ways. Today we're going to play a film by Tim Wise to just give you a perspective. When I try to teach the right way, knowing who you are, that's not racist or bias, it's just what it is. All first century writers know exactly what I'm talking about, you know? And we like to be historical here. So give me 1 second, we're going to get some things together. Like I tell people, a lot of first century writers like Godfrey Higgins and other European scholars, Albert Churchward, Gerald Massey, didn't have a problem with saying what it is. Or none of the first century cartographers that pinpoint the holdings of what was in the Americas and Europe. So I want people to have a clear understanding of that as well. A lot of first century writers told exactly what it is. And one of the prophetic first century writers was Godfrey Higgins. You know? And it's just what it is. And when you have no disrespect, European writers or triladics, this is what I want to say. And we got to make it fact from history, because I don't teach prejudice or hate. I teach history, and that's just what it is. And a lot of people have been subjugated and told a lie from those that's not willing to tell the truth. And that can be Eurocentric or Negrocentric propaganda. But the aspect when you're not a caveman, you can't be. Not us, and we are different. Now, I'm not saying the creator don't create, but what I'm trying to say, a liger is a liger and a tiger. A donkey is not a horse. Now when these pseudo black people be talking about albino this and that, anybody can have create an albino if you have the albino gene, and that's European or black. If you have that albino gene, if both parents have that, you can create an albino. Now, what it is the truth is that the percentage of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans is zero or close to zero in people from African populations, and is about 1 to 2% in people of European or Asian background. See, this is no disrespect. So when you look up an Albion, when you look up what a trailer is, grew up in a cave, grew up in a dirty cave, this, that, and the other, that's who it's speaking of. And no brother, no American from Africa have no Neanderthal blood in them. They have no Neanderthal blood in them. So if you don't have any Neanderthal blood in you, and another so-called human or whatever you want to call it have a percentage of Neanderthal blood in them, you're not the same. And this is science. And like, we can't be mad at what science says when people try to say, well, the Bible says we're the same. No, it don't. No, it don't. Stop lying on the Bible. You haven't read it. You making stuff up. Because the percentage of Neanderthal DNA is zero in people from Africa. But it's around 2% in people of European or Asian background. And then the first thing people do is get upset. I said, don't be upset now, because people been lying, telling misnomer black people that you this and that and the other. No, that's not you. That's somebody else. But it's definitely not you. You see? And the facts is the facts. The facts is the facts. So let's deal with it.
Sir, there's God right in the clouds, Santa in the sky, white dude, all the biblical characters in the Bible, children's books, white people, even though they were in a part of the world where there are no white people, right? So even though we don't have that in our home, my child has nonetheless already at the age of 7 somehow internalized the idea that the creation source of the universe, whether taken in religious terms or humanistic and more naturalistic terms, is somehow closer to her than to Morgan Freeman. And if my daughter has internalized
Wait
that,
a
what do you
minute.
think?
I got to start this over, because that's so prophetic. Let me start this over. And let me wait for a minute. My professor, I got my GCU website up, and this what I be telling people. They was like, you've been teaching this ever since you was a graduate student. You've been teaching this, and we know this. It's for your people to know. And nobody can be upset over history. And that's the problem with us here. I keep telling you, you're not no slave. It didn't happen like that. You're not Negro, black, and colored. Yes, he telling some truth, but he ain't telling it all the way. But I want you to get this perspective and listen.
Sir, there's God right in the clouds, Santa in the sky, white dude, all the biblical characters in the Bible, children's books, white people, even though they were in a part of the world where there are no white people, right? So even though we don't have that in our home, my child has nonetheless already at the age of 7 somehow internalized the idea that the creation source of the universe, whether taken in religious terms or humanistic and more naturalistic terms, is somehow closer to her than to Morgan Freeman. And if my daughter has internalized that, what do you think black and brown children internalize when they see the same imagery? And they see those images. They see them in the stained glass of our churches. You see them in the Christmas cards that get sent around every holiday season, where baby Jesus is in the manger in what apparently is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, rather than the other Bethlehem. Right? Lily white Jesus, which makes no sense anthropologically, biologically, historically, makes no sense at all. But our children see those images and it can affect them. Now, if you were to try to break into my house and hurt my children, I would kill you. Without hesitation. I don't even have a gun, but I would find something and I would throw it at you and you would die. Like, it's just that simple. I would make sure that you died, right? If you were to try to hurt my kids. I'm not saying that because I'm a badass. I'm just saying, like, I'm just letting you know, like, don't mess with my children. But the problem, right? The problem is that there is something coming into that house. And it is hurting my children, and it's hurting all of our children, and it's hurting us, and I didn't even know it was there. See, the doors are locked at night, the windows are shut, the alarm is on, and whatever this thing is doesn't know the code, but the dirty little secret is it doesn't need to. It weasels its way into our children's brains and affects them. That's how I know that we've all ingested this poison, and we better own that if we're going to have an honest dialogue. It's not about feeling guilty about it. In fact, that's the beauty of it, right? If we've all been subjected to it, there's no reason to feel guilty.
Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I hope. If a man took testosterone therapy for 30 days, here is exactly how his body will transform. In the first 30 days, some men will start to notice changes, such as improved mood, increased energy levels, and more motivation. After 90 days, he won't be able to recognize. I hope you're doing fine, whatever you are today. As you usually know, this is a presenter Ginger
Let me
Stories,
fast
and I'm
forward a
hoping
little
you're
bit
fine
further.
this festive season.
Because I want to get from the talking.
We take responsibility, which is not the same as guilt. Responsibility is what you take because of the kind of person you are. Guilt is what you feel for the stuff you've actually done. Those are two different things. We take responsibility for things even when we're not to blame for them. So that's the first piece. The second piece, the systemic piece, right? Our inability or our lack of willingness to admit that there's also a systemic element to racism, that it's not just about personal prejudice. If it were, it'd be so much easier, right? Because we could just educate people out of their biases, right? And we could somehow undo their personal stuff and everything would be fine. But there's a bigger problem, and it's systemic. It's the way that policies and practices and everyday procedures reinforce inequality between different racial groups, even if there's no overt bigotry in the room. What do I mean by that? Let me tell you a story to make that point. And it's a story about my own life. I am from the South. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. I've lived in the South all my life, 10 years in New Orleans, the rest of it in Nashville. 5
Oops, my fault.
months in Houston, but we don't talk about that. No offense to Houston, I'm just saying, like, there are reasons, and we will not discuss them. So growing up in Nashville, I went to school in public schools at a time when they had really just become truly integrated. That may seem sort of hard to believe because theoretically, right, the Supreme Court outlawed segregation back in 1954, but as was the case in Nashville, so too was it the case all throughout the South, that very few school systems actually moved toward real desegregation for about 20 years. So it was 1974, the year that I started first grade, that the school system in Nashville was actually truly integrated all the way down to the first grade level. And so by 1979-80, my fifth grade year, right, there were a lot of teachers in that system that had been in there for a really long time. Like, they had been teaching since the days of segregation, and they were the kind of people that really preferred the days of segregation, right? So they didn't like having to teach black kids now, but what they really didn't like was having to teach white kids who hung out with black kids. And that was me. See, I told you before, most of the time when we say we have black friends, we're lying. In my case, I pretty much didn't have anything but black friends for the first several years of school, because I went to preschool at a historically black college when I was 3 years old. Tennessee State University Early Childhood Ed program. So most of my peers were black kids. So when I got into public school, that's who I was hanging out with. That's who I played ball with. That's who I played on the playground with. That's who I sat in the cafeteria with. And there were teachers who not only didn't like the black kids, but really didn't like me, particularly because of my affinities, both culturally, linguistically, and artistically with black folks. These are the early days of hip hop, and I was that kid. Like, I was the white kid that hung out with. We would have like rap battles, and I'm not going to do that shit now because it would be tragic. But in those days, like 79, 80, you could be really bad at that in Nashville and you were still the best on the block, right? Because it was Nashville, it wasn't Brooklyn, it wasn't the Bronx, right? So the teachers really had a problem with who I hung out with and the music that I listened to, friends were. And there was one particular teacher, Mrs. Crownover, who was most offended by it. And so one day I get a report card, I have a D- in a reading class, which was what she taught, right? And my mom freaked out because reading was like the one thing I could do, right? If it was a math class, she would have totally not even blinked. She'd have been like, well, at least you didn't fail. Good for you. You got it up from the F last time, you know? But in this particular case, I've been reading since I was like 2 and a half, right? So she sort of freaks out. She schedules a parent-teacher conference. She goes to talk to Miss Crownover. And within about 30, 45 seconds, she realizes that grade had nothing to do with my actual effort, let alone my attitude, let alone my ability to read. It had to do with my social circle, because Miss Crownover looks at my mom within the first minute of the meeting and says, any white parent that would send their kids to public school in this day and age, meaning an integrated day and age, obviously isn't fit to be a parent. They've lost their mind. This, by the way, is not what you want to say to my mother. So within a day or two, she organized with some other parents, and within 2 or 3 or 4 days, she had very directly and unceremoniously made sure that Mrs. Crownover was relieved of her income and her professional duties from there on out. She was forced into early retirement, as she should have been. So good for my mom. On the one hand, that's great. We got rid of the bigot. But remember, I told you it wasn't about individual bigots. It was about systems. And so here's the problem. Even as my mother took action, as she should have, to remove this racist from the classroom where she had no business teaching, right? But the problem was that after Miss Crownover was gone, I went back into a school system that every day, in a very subtle but pernicious way, was sending the same kind of message that Mrs. Crownover was trying to send, which is white students are better, black students are lesser, and they shouldn't be together. How was the system sending that message? Very easy. By putting almost all the white kids in the honors and the advanced level classes, no matter what kind of students we were. I was a lousy student. I wasn't a good student till like last week. I literally got my shit together like Tuesday of last week, right? I wasn't a good student, but I was always in the honors track. And the black kids, no matter how bright they were almost always in the standard or the remedial level track and never moved up no matter how well they did. So the system was sending a message by dividing us and saying that it was division based on ability, but it wasn't. They were sending the message that Crownover was sending. They didn't even need her there to send it, you see, and my mother never saw that. And I never saw that. It went right over our heads. And that's not just a 1979 story. That continues to happen today. Right now in this country, students of color are half as likely to be placed in advanced placement and honors classes compared to white students. Students of color are half as likely to be taught by the most experienced teachers. White students twice as likely to have the most experienced teachers, right? Black Latino students 2, 3, even 4 times more likely to be suspended or expelled, even though they do not break the rules more often than white students. That's the belief, but it's not true. There have been 14 different studies. They all find the same thing, that the rates of serious school rule infractions are virtually identical across racial lines. People bringing drugs to campus, equally across racial lines. People bringing weapons to campus, actually white men more likely to bring guns and knives to campus in K-12 schools than black men or Latino men. Contrary to popular belief, but that's what the Centers for Disease Control research says. But who is it that's getting caught? It's black kids and Latino kids. They're the ones getting searched. They're the ones getting detected. They're the ones getting suspended and often prosecuted. Whereas white students are doing the same thing, doing drugs just as much, bringing weapons just as often, if not more so, and escaping notice. So that's still happening. That's a system, and it doesn't require one overt racist in the classroom for that to continue, right? So that becomes a problem. We have to do more than just look at the individual. We have to look at the way that structures operate, sometimes without us even realizing it's happening. Because if we don't do that, we can get rid of every individual bigoted cop or every individual bigoted teacher or any individual bigoted employer. We can sue them, I guess, in court, and maybe people can even win those lawsuits. But what does that really change unless we take aim at those institutional policies that keep recreating inequality? The third piece, our unwillingness to see how history affects the present, how the past and the present mix. We really don't like this. We really don't want to talk about, when I say we, I mean those of us called white especially. There are people of color who don't necessarily always want to engage it either, but especially those of us called white. We'll say things like this when people of color bring up racism. We'll say, well, why can't you just get over it? You know, all of that slavery stuff was a long time ago. In fact, Louis C.K. has this really funny bit, right, where he jokes about how white people have just moved the date of slavery further and further and further back. Like it used to be, slavery was 100 years ago, because it was. And then it was, slavery was 125 years ago, because it was. And now it should be, slavery was 150 years ago, but we'll actually say things like, that was hundreds and hundreds, that was like 1,000 years ago. We've not had slavery for 500 years. When in fact it's very much within the lifetime of people in this room's great-great-grandparents, even sometimes great-grandparents. And in fact, de facto slavery extended well past the Emancipation Proclamation. There were people of color being sent back into virtual enslavement all throughout the first 30 years of the 20th century, being made to work in the mines in places like Birmingham, coal mines there and elsewhere, going back to the very plantations from which their grandparents and great-grandparents had been emancipated as sharecroppers, as tenant labor, tenant farmers, right? So in fact, slavery isn't that long ago. Segregation certainly isn't that long ago. But here's the point. We don't want to talk about it. And this is really funny that we want to tell black and brown folks to get over the past, because frankly, those of us who are white, we love the past. Absolutely flippin' love the past. How do I know that? Because some of us clearly want to go back to it. How do I know that? Because the Tea Party was a thing. And during that period when the Tea Party was a thing, you had a bunch of white folks going to rallies dressed in Revolutionary War costumes, carrying muskets and wearing powdered wigs. Okay, here's the thing. If you dress up in a Revolutionary War costume with a musket and a powdered wig, calling yourself the Tea Party, which I think is a really old-ass reference, you were in no position to lecture black people about getting over the past. That's all, right? Because by definition, you're still rocking like 1774. You got me? Right? But even now, right, we say things like, what is July 4th? Other than a reference to the past. Like, why do we still celebrate that? Independence Day. We broke away from the British a long ass time ago. That didn't happen last Friday. So why do we still set off fireworks every July 4th, right? I dare you to go up next Independence Day to like the most patriotic guy on the route, you know, with the red, white, and blue wardrobe, because that's an awesome wardrobe palette. And like big I Heart the USA button on his hat, like flying a flag, blaring Lee Greenwood from the back of a pickup truck. I dare you to go up to that guy, tap him on the shoulder and say, yeah, this is all really nice. This is great. But when are you going to get over it? Hope you have running shoes on, because he's going to chase you. Although he'll probably have had, you know, slices of mom's apple pie that he won't be able to catch you. But my point being, we love the past as long as it makes us feel good about ourselves, right? When a current presidential candidate says he wants to make America great again, it's a reference to the past, right? It's a reference that says we want to go back to when things were great, but only great for certain people, because the time that's being remembered so fondly wasn't so great for everyone. Right? So we love the past as long as it venerates us. We just don't want to deal with the ugly, but that's not how history works. You got to deal with the good and the bad and everything in between, right? And we know that, don't we? Like on a personal level, we know, like, put aside politics and race, just like you as individuals, right? We all come from families that are jacked up in one way or another, right? We all have dysfunction. We all have really messed up stuff in our families, some of which we talk about, a lot of which we never talk about, right? And the fact is, if you ever want, just as an individual, to move past your past, you have to confront it. Whether that's on a therapist's couch or whether that's with friends or a lover or a spouse or a partner, whatever it is, you've got to be willing to confront where you come from in order to get to the next place that's better. But we don't want to do that. We don't do that as individuals, and it eats us up. And we don't do that as a country. But we have to do that, because the past affects the present. Inertia isn't just a property of the physical universe. It's also a property of the political and the economic universe. And here's how I know it's so important. Again, a story involving my own children about why it's so important that we know our history and are able to articulate that, and the dangers of not knowing it. So, as it turns out, our daughters are both dancers. And
hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I just hope that you've learned, you've seen,
We
you've
got to
heard
fast
for
forward
yourself.
because I don't like when people be there jumping in.
Let's
But
be white one.
that's part one. But I want to get
Most
into
people have no clue.
Part two
The best
for
way
you.
to increase your income is not with stocks or real estate. There's a little known trend attracting millions of people
part
right
two
now.
is just him
I
speaking.
said this.
So let me get 1 second. We jump right in part two, and then here go part two.
a little 3-minute discussion, wasn't a long conversation, right? But it was enough to let her know that history matters and that the things that she sees didn't just happen, that they're the result of certain policies. Because here's what's interesting about that area that we now like to call the ghetto. The reality is the ghetto was created, and public housing in particular was created not for poor black people. It was created for poor white people. And in fact, for the first several years of public housing, people of color couldn't even get into public housing projects. They were essentially segregated by race. Only poor white folks could even live there. And then what happened is the government created some new programs under the FHA program, the VA loan program, later on the GI Bill program, which allowed those same white folks who had been poor and struggling to leave public housing and to leave urban areas and to hustle it out to the suburbs where only we could live, or to the smaller towns where only we were going to be welcome. So what's interesting is that the hood became the hood because only people of color now were allowed to live there. White folks were literally being subsidized by the government to move to the suburbs. The white middle class, and make note of this, was built by government. government programs that underwrote those loans because those families could not have afforded a loan otherwise. They were able to get one because the government underwrote the loan and guaranteed the loan in case of default, but only for people of color. Only for white folks. People of color, by and large, couldn't get in on any of that. So white folks were able to move, people of color were not. Certain neighborhoods deteriorated economically, other neighborhoods went up in value. At the very same time, the government was doing what they called urban renewal, which meant they came through black neighborhoods and Latino neighborhoods, and they built interstates right through the heart of the community, right? Knocking down black homes, black apartments, knocking down black-owned businesses all around the country. Between 1950 and 1970, about 1 in 5 apartments or houses lived in by black folks was not to the ground for economic development purposes, even though people of color couldn't benefit from almost any of that economic development. So that's how our communities come to look the way they look. But if we don't know that, and if I don't tell my daughter that, but maybe, let's say I don't tell her because I don't know. What if I don't know the history? What if I don't do this work and therefore don't know the answer? What do you think my daughter is going to assume is the answer? What would you assume is the answer? You know what we would assume if we're not taught the history? We would default to the position of this culture, which says what? Wherever you end up, it's all about you. So if you're living in a poor neighborhood, it's just because you didn't work hard enough. And if you live in an affluent neighborhood, it's obviously because you're smarter, right? The default position of America is this notion of rugged individualism and meritocracy, and wherever you end up is all about your own genius, your own effort, your own morality, your own cultural ethics. That's what we believe, and we believe that even though there is no such thing as a rugged individual in the history of human beings. How do I know that? Very simple.
Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the channel.
He keep
Just
on
hope that
jumping,
you're doing
but
wherever you are today. This is
you need to be quiet. Let me go
a
back.
feral animal, right? They would be wild. It'd be like being raised on an island by a porpoise. They wouldn't even know how to have language. They'd probably try to eat you because they wouldn't understand there's like a taboo against that, right? You need to get the hell away from anybody who's actually a rugged individual because there are no such thing. And certainly, let me just say this, if you inherited $200 million from your daddy's real estate empire, you sure as hell are not a self-made anything or a rugged individual. You might want to write that shit down. So there is no rugged individual anything. We're all social beings. Some have had opportunity, others have not. Unless we're honest about that, unless we're willing to have a conversation, we end up misleading ourselves and we can't understand what we're seeing. And then if we can't understand it, we're not going to fix it, right? We're not going to fix the disparity in housing if we don't understand where it came from. So if the data says, and it does, that white folks on average have 15 times the net worth of black folks, 13 times the net worth of Latino folk, right? We just assume, well, we must have worked harder. Is that right? That's interesting because actually the black folks and brown folks have done some of the hardest work in this country ever since the country was founded. Were it not for the labor of African descended peoples, there would be no country at all. In fact, it was my family, white slave-owning family in the South that got black folks to do all the hard work because we were lazy asses and didn't want to work at all. White folks in the South on the plantation used to want to sit on the porch and drink mint juleps and have carriage rides rather than work, while black folks did all the real labor, and yet we decided that black folks are lazy, which I find fascinating. Right? And then people write to me and say, well, these black people, they're just taking all the jobs. Okay, which is it, precious? Because it can't be both. People of color can't take all the jobs and be lazy. I don't ask much of racists because I expect very little, but you cannot be lazy and take all the jobs. Are we at least clear on that? Like if you took all the jobs, you were like the opposite of lazy. If you are indeed lazy, you probably did not even take one job, let alone all of them. So I just need racists to get their damn story straight. That's all I ask. I just don't like moving targets. That's all, right? But if I don't tell my daughter the truth, she defaults to the position of the culture, and then she can't understand what the problem is. The same is true with policing. You can't understand the Black Lives Matter movement and the importance of it if you don't know the history and the relationship between law enforcement and black and brown peoples. If you understood that history, you wouldn't ask one question about why this movement is necessary and why it's righteous. If you knew that history, but you don't know it, and it's not your fault. You weren't supposed to know it, and nobody taught it to you, right? So you don't have to know that modern policing traces back to slave patrols. That black folks' first experience with law enforcement was having, you know who? Working class and poor white folks on horseback going and keeping black folks in line on behalf of the rich master that owned all the property. That sounds a lot like modern policing because ain't no rich people policing. right? It's working class folks who are out there protecting the property of rich people against the depredations of poor people. That's what modern policing is, and it traces back, and we know that's what modern policing is, by the way, because we will lock you up for 10 years for $100 worth of food stamp fraud, but if you take $12.5 trillion on Wall Street, 20% of the net worth of this country, you will not do 1 day in jail. So we know that law enforcement has got nothing to do with enforcing the law. It's got nothing to do with good people and bad people, lawbreakers and the law abiding. It only has to do with controlling certain people. And black and brown folks know who those certain people usually are because it's always been them. See, black folks know that it was cops who were involved in race riots and racial terrorism against black communities for the first 50 years of the 20th century. You didn't learn about that in class either, and that's not your fault. It wasn't taught, but in fact, every single year, just about from 1900 all the way to the 1930s, 1940s at least, there were race riots where white folks would just go into black communities, burn them to the ground, bomb them from the air like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, rip people out of their homes, beat them in the street, and police sat by, watched it happen, and participated. That doesn't mean that every cop in the modern era is like that, but it means that black folks can be excused for being not so clear on the decency of police in their communities because there's a history there. It was police who dragged black folks and white allies off of those sit-in stools at lunch counters in the South to enforce segregation. See, when your job is to enforce the law, and for most of American history, the law was against you as a people, then enforcing the law means you are the first line of oppression. People of color know that history and need to be excused when they don't just get over it because that continues. How do we know it continues? Very easy. We know from the data on racial profiling that black folks are twice as likely as white folks to be stopped and searched for drugs, even though white folks are more likely to have drugs on us on the occasions that we're searched. White folks use drugs and sell drugs at the same or higher rate than black folks and Latinos, and yet it is black folks and Latinos who in any given year make up 85 to 90% of the people who get arrested and incarcerated for a drug offense. See, people of color know that. And if we don't understand when black folks rise up and say Black Lives Matter. Well, what do you mean? All lives matter. Yes, sweetheart, I know they do. Yes, they do. And that is a totally irrelevant and unnecessary point to make. You see, you don't have to say all lives matter. We take that for granted. What we've never accepted in this country is that black and brown life matter. You have to proclaim that which is ignored, you see. That's why we have Black History Month right now and not White History Month. We don't have to have White History Month because we got May and June and July and August. And every other month where we learn about white folks, we don't have to call it that. See how slick that is? That's how white supremacy operates. You don't have to call it White History Month. You just call it history. And literature and theater and poetry and art. You don't have to racialize where it came from, right? That's what Malefiasante at Temple calls universalizing the particular, which is the hallmark of Eurocentric thought, right? Not everybody's experience is the same. And so when certain people have been left out of all, you have to call that out by name. Because see, we've always said all and we didn't mean it. We said all men are created equal and we didn't mean that shit, right? We didn't mean women, but we didn't even mean all men. We said all and it was a lie when we said it, right? And so in a sense, when you say Black Lives Matter, to respond with all lives matter would be like going in a time machine back to 1971. Y'all won't remember this. Those who were students, those who were older will. Around 1970, 71, 72, the big phrase was black is beautiful, right? There was this desire to take back the beauty narrative from a beauty industry, fashion industry, glamour industry that had hijacked it and denigrated black physicality and beauty, right? So folks were saying black is beautiful to reclaim a sense of beauty for themselves. It'd be like getting in a time machine, going back to 1971, hearing somebody say black is beautiful and tapping them on the shoulder and going, but we're all beautiful in our own way. Yeah, shut up, we know. Not the point. It'd be like going back to the early 80s when the HIV/AIDS crisis started. And it took several years for the president of the United States to even utter the word. Ronald Reagan didn't want to even utter the word, let alone cut loose with funding to deal with the problem until his buddy Rock Hudson died of it. And then all of a sudden he was willing to talk about it a little bit, right? So for the first several years, what'd you have? You had activists out in the street. You had ACT UP, Gay Men's Health Crisis, out in the street demanding research and funding for HIV/AIDS, right? And what they were saying, in effect, was people with AIDS lives matter. That wasn't the actual phrase, and we didn't have hashtags, but that was essentially what they were saying, right? People with AIDS, lives matter, and we need to pay attention because right now we're not paying attention to that. And we don't seem to believe it as a society, so we need to start believing it. It would be like getting in a time machine, going back to 1983, 82, in the middle of an ACT UP event or a gay men's health crisis event and shutting down the protest by saying, yeah, but what about pancreatic cancer? People die of all kinds of things, right? Sort of not the point. You have to proclaim that which is ignored. And if we know the history, we understand that, right? Because if we know the history, we know that it is indeed black life. And I would suggest brown life, life of color generally, indigenous life, that is usually denigrated, demeaned, ignored. On a sexual level, it's trans lives that are demeaned, ignored, right? It's women as women. So sometimes you got to proclaim that which is not in the obvious frame of reference. There's nothing pernicious about it. It's not about saying black lives are worth more than other lives. It's about, damn it, these lives actually do matter. And even though the history says they don't, we're here to tell you that they do. And there's nothing wrong about that at all. But if you don't know the history, it might seem untoward. And I get it. And again, it's not your fault that you don't know the history, but it is our responsibility to learn it and then apply it to what we see. Same is true with immigration. This immigration drama that we have right now is only possible because we don't understand our own history. As a country, and particularly those of us of European descent, we have lied to ourselves about how we got here. And for what reason? See, black folks know why they're here. Native peoples know why they're here and how they got here. A lot of Asian folk know, particularly if they're Chinese American, they know they got here because their ancestors were brought over to work on the railroads by the railroad barons who didn't care if thousands of them died laying track 19, 20 hours a day. But for those of us who are from Europe, we have this fiction that we've told, and we believe it, even though there's no truth to it. You know what the fiction is? It's two parts. Number one, we say things like, with regard to Mexicans coming over the border, with regard to immigrants coming over, but only that border. That's the only one we care about, right? The southern border. I find that interesting. We're not flipping out about Canada, right? We don't have any of the Minutemen or the anti-immigrant groups sitting off the coast of Nova Scotia with a gun and a scope trying to like pick off the sneaky Canadians that are trying to sneak in here for our superior healthcare system, which after all would be a pretty stupid thing to do. But in any event, we only care about that one border, forgetting for a minute that that border was created at the end of a war that was started on false pretense by this country, after which we jacked half of their country. And you weren't taught that in school either, because our history books aren't interested in telling the truth. They tell this very patriotic history that has no relationship to the fact. So that border is artificial. Mexican folk who are coming here, documented or not, let's be clear, are coming home. Their families were here before our families were here in almost every instance. But we forget that, and then we say things like, well, I don't mind them coming. I just want them to come legally, like my people did. The hell does that even mean? Come legally? There was no law to break when our people came. The fact that we didn't break a law that didn't even exist, you don't get cookies for that. You don't get like a pat on the back and a gold star because your great whatever was law-abiding when there was no law that he could have violated, even if he wanted to. But we've told this lie that we came for these upstanding principles. So we'll say things like, well, you know, our people came for liberty and freedom, democracy. These people are just coming for stuff. They're just coming for jobs. They're just coming for health care. They're just coming for stuff. We came for high-minded principle, right? Because we believe that. What kind of third-grade version of American history is that? Right? Like when Donald Trump says, well, Mexico's not sending their best. What the hell? You think Europe sent their best? Europe? No, our people were the losers of Europe. I'm not trying to be an asshole. I'm just telling you the truth. Like, our people were the losers of Europe. The winners didn't get on the boat. You understand what I'm saying? The winners didn't leave. Why the hell would you leave if you were winning? Only the losers left because they had no choice. They were dying. They were starving. They couldn't support their families. A lot of them were convicts who were sold into indentured servitude to work for rich European people. They were barely above the level of a slave themselves. The idea that we had these we didn't believe in liberty and freedom. And we know that because once we got to the colonies, we set up the opposite of liberty and freedom. And I don't just mean that for like black folks and native folks. I mean, even for other white folks. Like we spent most of the time in the early colonies trying to figure out who the witch was, right? It was like, well, you're not a Christian. Well, no, you're not a Christian. Well, no, you're not a Christian. I'm going to hang you from a tree. Really? Well, I'm going to drown you in the stream. Well, I'm going to set you on fire. Like, that wasn't liberty. The colonies were some of the least free places in the history of the cosmos. But we act like we came for liberty And they're just here to take advantage. Let's be clear, our people didn't come for liberty, they came for stuff. They came for stuff like land, they came for stuff like opportunity, they came for stuff like the ability to feed their families, and there's no shame in that. None at all. But just like there's no shame in our families having done that, there's no shame in brown families doing that and coming over that border from Mexico, Central America, or wherever else they might be coming. There's no shame in any event, but we've told a lie. It's like we have this image in our head that sometime in like 1650, this was a common scene in England. All the nice white noblemen got together, and one of them gathered his children around the fireplace in the middle of the 1600s and said, well, now, children, I think you'll agree with me that we're doing quite brilliant here, and we have this big mansion, and we have all this gold, and you remember last week when the king invited us to the palace and you played out in the garden with his children? I know, it was brilliant, right? It was great. It was great. It was great. I bet it was lots of fun, but Daddy thinks that we need to stop all that nonsense and maybe strike out on an adventure. So here's my plan. Even though we're doing so well, even though we pretty much run the show here in England, I think that what we should do this summer, follow me, stick with me, I know it's going to be a stretch, but I promise it's going to be great, is we should get on a big boat. A rickety old ship. I don't even know if it's seaworthy, children. It might sink. We might be eaten by sharks. We might get hijacked by pirates. We might get scurvy and die a horrible death. However, I think you will agree it will be an adventure, a great one indeed. That did not happen. Noblemen didn't leave. Those who were doing well did not leave. Only the losers got on the boat. People say things like, well, my family came over on the Mayflower. Okay, sweetheart, you might not want to talk about that. If you actually knew who was on those early ships, I'm not sure who was, but I know who wasn't. The king. The king was not on that ship. Nobody the king really wanted to keep around was on that ship, right? So our inability to see this, though, understand the importance historically. If we don't understand that we came for the same reasons that folks come today, be they documented or not, then we can't see them in us, and we can't see us in them. And that's why we have this drama, because we're spending all this time pretending that our motivations and our even human decency and ethics are different when they're not, you see. This is why history matters so much. We can't fix any of these problems, whether it's immigration issues, whether it's criminal justice issues, whether it's wealth disparity, all of that. We can't do anything about that if we're not willing to understand history. But let me close with this. And it's a point that I think needs to be made, because sometimes when we talk about racism and we talk about the heavy weight of history, sometimes people assume that there is an attempt on my part or other anti-racist activists or educators' part to instill guilt in white people. I have no interest in white guilt, none. And people of color surely have no interest in white guilt. Guilt will not liberate anybody from anything. It will not liberate any of us from systems of inequality. It isn't about feeling guilty. It's not even about white people per se. It's about whiteness as a system, right? Sometimes people get tripped up on that, right? And they think like, oh, you hate white people. Actually, let me be clear. I love me some white people. I totally, absolutely love me some white people. My wife is white. I totally love her. Those daughters that I've been telling you about, they're white, because that's what happens when white people make babies. I love them. My mom, love her, nice white lady. And my dad and I don't get along, but it's not because he's white. It's about some other shit that we don't have time to process tonight. But if you read my book, White Like Me, you'll know what some of that is. We don't have to talk about that. It's not about white people. It's about whiteness. It's about a system of white supremacy that has turned us against one another, right? And so I want to tell you a story that tries to explain the difference between guilt and responsibility, so you'll know what I mean when I say those things are different, because it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to really understand why. So let me just share a brief story with you, and then I'll take questions, and I'll let you out of here, and I'll be happy to sell you some books if you want one, because I got a college fund to pay for. So, you know, feel free to come buy some merchandise. But anyway, the story is not about racism, so that part of the speech is over, right? It's not about oppression. It's not about privilege. It's not about inequality. It's about something totally different. But I think the story has a lesson in it about those subjects. So it has to do with something that happened to me when I got out of college. I graduated 26 years ago this May from Tulane University in New Orleans. And when I graduated, for some reason, I'm still not totally clear on this, I thought it would be a really great idea to move into a very large house with 9 other people. Let me just give you a little life advice, all right? Like, if you haven't already figured this out, okay, do not think for 1 minute that it is ever a good idea to move into a very large house with 9 other people. It usually is not nearly as fun as you think it is going to be. It has all kinds of problems, but we didn't think about any of those. We thought it was going to be great. Why? Because it was going to be cheap. And we needed that because we were broke, right? We were right out of college. We didn't have any money. Rent was $525 a month. I don't mean per person, I mean total, right? So again, not good at math, but I can do those numbers. $52.50 per person per month, man. You add the cable bill, the utility bills, we split the food, right? It's still less than $100 a month. So like on that level, this was a great idea, right? This was brilliant, right? $100 a month, man. Even in 1990 dollars, that was good, right? It'd be ridiculous today, but it would be good even by 1990 standards. So on a financial level, it made sense. But about 6 weeks into this little experiment in communal living, we came to understand, or at least I did, why it had been a terrible mistake. And this is what happened. I was working downtown and I was living uptown. So I get on the streetcar to come back uptown in New Orleans. I get off the streetcar, I walk, 5 blocks or so into the house on Robert Street. I go up the steps at 1805 Robert. I open the door and I'm met by this incredible smell. And I mean that in a good way, which is important to point out because when you live with 9 other people, there's all kinds of smells. They're usually not good. This one was actually really nice. It was the smell of dinner being cooked for the whole group because we also took turns making dinner for each other. And this particular night, one of my roommates was making dinner. On the left front burner of the stove, there was this big pot of gumbo, right? And man, that's what you do in New Orleans. Big pot of gumbo, and it smelled good, and it looked good, and it even had shrimp in there. Not many, like I said, we were broke, but it had like 3. 3 of those really little bitty ass shrimp. Those shrimp that are like so small, right, that they make jumbo shrimp look like lobsters or something, right? And so I looked at it and I smelled it and I thought, man, that looks great. And when my roommate asked me if I wanted any, I normally would have said yes, but as it turned out, I didn't know he was going to make gumbo for the night. And so I'd already had dinner downtown before I, came uptown after I got off work. So I said, hey man, I already ate, but do me a favor. Smells great, looks great. Take me some of that, put it in a container, put it in the fridge. I'm gonna take it to work tomorrow for lunch. And he said, okay, great. And so he does that, and then I go upstairs and, listen to music, watch TV, hung out with some friends or whatever, and did whatever we did for fun in 1990. There wasn't much. Like social networking in 1990 was pretty much you just walk down the hall to your roommate's room and you're like, hey, what you doing? And they were like, nothing, it's 1990, there's nothing to do, go back to sleep. Get with us in like 15 years and there'll be something maybe, or 20 years, right? So we all sort of go to bed early. I went to bed sort of early, woke up the next morning at like 7:30, came downstairs to get some coffee, get ready to go to work, and I noticed that on the left front burner of our stove was still the same pot of gumbo. And man, it did not smell as good or look as good as it had the night before. And my roommate had neither saved any of it for me, nor had he cleaned it. So I was pissed on 2 levels, right? Now the food had gone to waste. I definitely wasn't going to eat it now. But he also left the mess for me or, maybe one of the other roommates to clean. So I sat there and I thought about what I wanted to do. Part of me wanted to wake him up, right? Get him to clean it, give him hell for it. But then I thought, no, I'm going to be nice. I'm just going to clean it. I'll take it up with him when I get home. So I took the pot of gumbo and I brought it over to the sink and I got the brush and the soap and I started running the water into the pot of nasty day-old gumbo, and I stopped myself halfway through. And I said, man, I don't have to clean this. This isn't my mess. I didn't even eat any of this, let alone did I make it. So now I'm feeling really self-righteous because I'm talking myself out of doing the hard work, right? So now I feel real smart. So I take the pot of gumbo and I put it right back where I found it on the left front burner, right? And I walk out the door, head held high, knowing that I had not been suckered into cleaning somebody else's mess, right? So then I come back that night at about 6:15, 6:30, and I see one of my other roommates making dinner on the right front burner of the stove. But on the left front burner, right where it had been now for 24 hours, it's the same pot of gumbo getting nastier, more disgusting, more crusted on the sides of the pot. I looked at my roommate, I'm like, man, what are you doing? Like, I know you can smell dinner from last night. How the hell can you make dinner for us now on the right front burner when it's right under your nose? Why don't you clean that? And he looked at me and said, hey man, I didn't make the gumbo. I didn't even eat any of the gumbo. I wasn't even here last night. How about you? I said, hey man, not me. Now we both felt self-righteous and we knew what it meant. He looked at me and said, so, you want some lentils and rice? And I said, absolutely. So I piled up my plate with lentils and rice. I ate my dinner. I wiped off the dish in the sink, cleaned it, dried it, put it in the dish rack, went upstairs, hung out with the roommates, did whatever we do for fun in 1990 once again, went to bed sort of early. Woke up the next morning. I'd forgotten to set an alarm. Wake up about 7. But here's a tip. If you're living in a house where a pot of gumbo has been sitting on the left front burner of the stove for what is now 36 and a half hours, you are not going to need an alarm clock to wake your ass up. You are going to be awake, right? Because the smell is going to find you. It is going to crawl out of the pot of gumbo on the legs that it grew overnight. And I'm not speaking in metaphor, English majors. I mean that shit literally. Like the stink is going to grow feet and legs, and it is going to crawl out of the pot, across the kitchen, across the living room, up the stairs, down the back hall, go on your door frame, and it is going to find with the precision of a laser that thing on the front of your face you call a nose, and you will be awake. And now I was pissed because I knew what the smell meant, right? I knew what was waiting for me on the left front burner, having not been cleaned by anybody, least of all the guy that made the gumbo. So I opened my door real loud. I start stomping down the hall, hoping to wake people up, hoping to let them know just how displeased I am. Live with 9 other people, cannot find one of them. And the guy that made the gumbo's like, where's Waldo? Nobody knows where in the hell he went. He just made the gumbo like a practical joke and disappeared, right? Just wanted to see how long it would take for somebody else to clean up his mess, I guess. And I get down to the bottom of the stairs. I look across the living room into the kitchen. I see the pot of gumbo, and I'm pretty confident the gumbo saw me, right? With the eyes that it had also grown. It was evolving right there in our kitchen very rapidly, yes? And it was at that moment, not one moment earlier, but definitely not a moment later, that I came to understand maybe the most important lesson I'd ever learned about any subject. And what was it? The lesson was it didn't really matter anymore who made the mess. Didn't really matter anymore who was the author of all this unpleasantness, as the old saying goes. The only thing that mattered was that I was tired of living in that nastiness. I was tired of living with the residue of somebody else's actions. I was not to blame, but I had to take responsibility, because if I didn't, it may not get clean. You see, and the same is true with human society. When we decide that we will clean up the residue of what other folks left us, even though they did it without our permission and without our involvement, when we decide that we're tired of living in that, we will clean it. Not because we are to blame, not because we are guilty, but because we're the only damn ones left. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Welcome
and
back
I got
to the
one
show.
more
Just
little
hope that you land and
clip I want to play. Let me see something. Let's see if I can find it. And like I'll be saying, man, it's nothing wrong with being proud and understanding your history, not hating no one else or being mad at no one else, but being able to know clearly what's going on. Let me see. I don't know if I can find it. Did I have it? Oh, here it go. Oh, dang. Hold on. Let me see. I don't know if it'll let me. I might have to play it on my phone. Let's see. Let's see.
I mean, imagine, you go all around the world and smash up everything that other civilizations built, loot what they built, pillage, steal, even steal their ideas and their concepts and their philosophies. And then you sit on top of this mountain of stolen goods and declare yourself to be rich because of your own merit. And imagine telling this lie to your children, to your own children, to your grandchildren, generation after generation. How do you think that's going to go? You didn't invest in creating actual merit. You cheated, you lied, you stole, you brutalized, and then you tell your own people that everyone else in the world has nothing and you have everything because of how much better you are than everyone else. How long is that lie sustainable? I mean, these are people who actually have civilizations, who actually created and built and accomplished and didn't just pillage and plunder. And there's still those people today, even though you have oppressed them, there's still those same people. And you're still the way you are. I mean, a good example actually is African Americans. I don't know if you can think of a people who were more held back, more deprived, more sabotaged than African Americans. You took everything away from them and took them away from everything. they started in your country at less than zero, literally regarded and treated as subhuman, not allowed to learn to read or write or anything for hundreds of years. But you see, they come from a people of accomplishment to one degree or another, not a people of piracy and theft and appropriation. They come from a people who created and built and developed in their own countries, in their own land. And even though you did everything that you could possibly do to suppress them, to hold them down, to hold them back, and you're still doing that until today, nevertheless, I don't think anyone can dispute the fact that African Americans have become a global cultural superpower. And people like this, with a history like this, with a legacy like this, simply cannot be held back for any length of time by a people who do not have a similar history, people who have never actually invested in their own civilizational development. And that's the West. You're going to get left behind. You're going to get surpassed, and you are going to end up being nothing more than a footnote in history.
And so when we talk about things, man, and when we share things from different topics and different perspective, as like I said, I've been able to have the pleasure to speak on college campuses and things. When I speak on different first century history writers and cartographers, which they saw in history and biblically, this is what I be trying to tell our brothers and sisters. We have a rich history, and there's no, the Eurocentric and the Negrocentric propaganda has been destroyed and should be talked about. How? By the true scholars in history, no matter what color they are. It's just like when I was lecturing yesterday, when I said I invite everybody on social media on Sunday, but when people have taken oath and then they act like they don't know where the information come, like, no disrespect. A brother that was a Freemason said, well, where am I get the information? And I tell people, the information, you should be asking your potentate. You should be asking your potentate, because if you're a Freemason, a low-level 3 Mason, which 32 degrees, when I was lecturing yesterday, you have to agree with that, and your potentate do too. Because everything I talk about is on a Masonic table, and history was really told in reverse. If you see it, and all first century historians know what I'm saying. The slave, so-called slave trade didn't happen like that. None of that stuff happened like that. You don't have no Neanderthal blood in your body. So it ain't no disrespect when people say, well, God is love. I get that. And I understand righteousness for everyone. But when we talk about science and things that can be proven in genetics, the misnomer black man from Africa, which everybody say you from Africa and everybody black person from Africa, okay. Well, the so-called African don't have any form of Neanderthal blood or DNA in his or her blood. These is facts. But the European from Europe does, which the professor said he European. The Asian does. They have at least 2% of Neanderthal, which they call caveman, trailerdyke, Albion blood in their veins. And look what trailerdyke mean. And this ain't no disrespect. That's DNA. And you damn sure ain't from no monkey. And this ain't no disrespect to no one. The European would say this. Godfrey Higgins, even the first century writers that taught the truth. When I talk about Godfrey Higgins, when I talk about Albert Churchward and Gerald Massey, when these people be acting like they don't know what I'm talking about. Even when I talk about with this science, when I tell people I'm not no Prince Hall Mason, I don't deal with no mystic, no secret stuff. I ain't took no oath. Am I initiated? Yes, through the wisdom, but this ain't no oath here. I wear my fez freely. I'm a son of a Muslim, just like my European colleagues that would tell the truth. Just like what we showed on with the Scottish Rite Mason showing Noble Drew Ali 135th birthday. So we're not here to disrespect. What we're here is to illuminate the rich history that we have. When people are trying to say, oh, this ain't nothing come from nobody else. Let's deal with language. Let's trace it. Let's deal with historical names. Let's deal with Amazigians. What is an Amazigian? That's a Freeman. That's a Berber. That's you and I. That's a Moor. What did the Bible say? The 1599 Geneva Bible, Blackamoor. Black. They called you Blackamoor because they were describing the you of that Moor. You have Tony Moors, Swarty Moors. When you deal with in the Netherlands, Swarty Piet. You have brunette Moors. You had Egyptian Moors. This is a fact. And then you got first century writers like Bertram Thomas. When people be acting like what the research, Bertram Thomas, he wrote the book called The Arab. He stayed with the Arab. He wrote a plethora of books. Bertram Thomas wrote a plethora of books. So when people be acting like they don't know and they call themselves historians, that's a Masonic game that a lot of people play. No matter if you black or white. How? Because they act like they don't know, and they know. They potentate know, especially if they're an educator. This is no disrespect to nobody. And this is what need to be taught. You know, with us, like my European Jewish colleagues, with their 7th hour with their children. We're supposed to support this. Nobody else supposed to be teaching our children. No one else supposed to be teaching this history because they're not going to get it. And just like Tim Wise said, if you don't teach your kids this, no matter if they misnumbered black or white, what they going to think? That their skin ain't nothing. You can get a black misnumbered dial and a white dial, put it in your kid's face, and they going to pick the white dial is pretty. And they going to say that the black dial is ugly. You can ask them what hair is better. They're going to say the white dial hair is better than the misnumbered black dial. And the conspiracy to destroy black boys and girls is still mental. What? No disrespect. What? The white Santa Claus, the white Jesus. It ain't no disrespect to no one. Hell, and if you love Jesus so much, why do Jesus get replaced with another figure of Santa Claus on Nimrod's birthday per se, or celebrating the Yule? It ain't no disrespect to no one. I mean, you can't be afraid to tell your history. You know, you can't be afraid. With all the history books is there. Well, all the history proves without a shadow of a doubt is there. And if people like it don't matter, it do matter. That's the whole point. That's what vibration about. That's what change happened. Change happened when people know and they get behind the cause. Just like he was saying with the so-called homosexual people. I don't have a problem. Just like he was saying with the gay people with HIV. What? They had to come together and make a fight. What? Pertaining to the laws the same way we can. That's why I be saying, people, man, you got to do things the right way pertaining to the laws. You know? And that's what this is about. This ain't no separation. What is about? Man, we know who we are. It's a monotheism, no matter what you call it. We all brothers and sisters. That's the problem. We wear the same attire, if you understand it. That's the uniting of Asia, what the prophet was talking about. Your brothers and all of them coming together, understanding, being a people, being agreed to a people, one nationality with many cultures. You have to understand that dynamics. To understand that you one nationality and many cultures, that have to be understood across the border and taught. Once that understood, we'll be okay. It ain't about arguing over religion. That's not what we do in Moorish science. We have a clear understanding, especially if you're a Moor. You are from the tribe of Judah, lineage of David by blood. You know? No, I can't see you. Oh, I don't know. So I don't know. I think my phone about to go out. So I just wanted to holler at the people real fast, man, and just share some stuff with films and show people like, come on, man, come to class and learn. And people gonna be exposing themselves. And that's why I tell people jump on my YouTube channel. You have to have tough skin because people gonna say anything. But like I tell people, I'm not no Freemason. This ain't no Prince Hall mess. This ain't no lower level science, snowman wisdom. If you've been following me for a long time, I'm gonna always teach the truth. It's sacred with me, but nothing's secret. That's why I always gonna speak freely, but I'm not gonna let nobody come on here and play stupid or disrespect anything. You won't go to nowhere else to do that. And we shouldn't do that here, and we shouldn't allow that to happen on this platform. If you're not here to learn, then we should be standing up and be like, removing these people from the platform. Because everything we talk about, you can research it. You don't have to like it or feel like you feeling guilty, because it ain't nothing to feel guilty about. But when people say it don't matter, if it didn't matter, well, why didn't no one tell the truth? Why didn't no one reveal it? Why did we do replacement theory? Why everything is a replacement? And all the first century writers, when we talk about all the church fathers and all the so-called figures biblically, is when you research it, all you can prove that it's melanated, and I proved that from writers. It's nothing to argue about, especially if we Moors. You know, we can't go on, no disrespect, saying this some other man's science or some European science or Albia, some Trailer-dyke science. When we from the tribe of Judah, lineage of David by blood. When we talk about Ruth the Moabitess and Tamir, and we can use the Bible and prove that the Bible can prove without a shadow of a doubt that the misnomer black man is the father of civilization, proved by the Bible alone. And then people act like color don't matter and this don't matter. But then they try to use that to subjugate you, to say you ain't nothing. The hell, they got scriptures for the damn slave. I be sharing all this stuff with y'all. It's in the libraries. It's in the Library of Congress to show you how you were trapped with the overseer, to show you how you was read wrong. Even when I read the Septuagint, I told y'all, when people do not want to get into no biblical discussion, because the Septuagint, those were Hebrews discussing that. If you know how to read, when it's talking about the Jews did this, then you got to, it's too easy. Get the encyclopedia. Research what a Jew is, what a Hebrew. Research what Jewish is. If you a truth teller, you would be able to tell the truth. You will see with your own eye. But most people know no one's have that eye. When we trying to act like it's some prejudiced thing, and it's not. When you're trying to replace an individual, you know, when you're trying to say this, and we just talking about on all levels of biblical scripture. If we want to put it just like King James, we showed the King James that everybody be talking about. That ain't the one we talking about. Or Scotland, we ain't talking about no European, no King James, no Demont. That ain't what we talking about. And see, they're going to always get you with the spookism. We're talking about the historical things, the things that's going to trace us, not no demology of King James. We know what that is. But we talk about the King of Scots, which been proven, which we show, which all first century writers say. So how are we going to sit up here and say it doesn't matter when the story is told from a other or a westernized or perspective, and even when I say a Negro-centric perspective, when it's told from a perspective of you never did nothing in history. And the biblical scriptures is not about you. This is no disrespect, or even try to tell a misnomer, a black man that the Quran is the misnomer black man religion. And we're talking about the brother from Israel. Because if the Jew, the Igbo, when we talk about some God of Allah, and if we saying this is some Arabian stuff, this is not what we're talking about. And that's what I tell people. I'm not on nobody's side. Now the Islam I could talk about is what Credo Matua talked about. Is what Bamboo Fall Sheikh, Bamboo Fall talk about. We ain't talking about no Arabian Islam. And see, this have to be explained matter of fact when people be trying to say we all the same. No, we're not. And we're not the same DNA-wise neither. And it's no disrespect to no one. How? Because science proved that. The biblical scriptures prove that. I'm not saying that you better or nothing. I'm not saying that. But we talk about when it come down. Man, what you've been told what you are, that's not true. That's not factual. You're not from no monkey. You're not. You're not. You didn't grow up in no cave. You always knew how to write. You always was upright. You always had running water. You had universities in Timbuktu and Salamanca. And when I talk about Islamic scholars, I can talk about a real Islamic melanated scholars in the first century that traveled the world. Batuta, you know, Ibn Battuta. I might be pronunciating the name wrong, but the history is there. And everybody know this is facts. We can trace that so far for history of being literate, knowing how to write and read. This is no disrespect to no one. We talk about the riches of the world, Mansa Musa. When you see the map, the Italian map, the cartographers didn't have a problem with pinpointing what they saw. We already demonstrated this from scholarship. And every first century writer, even from the one world Tartarians, these Europeans that told the truth, like, you can't believe that transatlantic slave trade that your so-called teacher teach you in school, or you take a black history class and they'll gift you with that Negro-centric propaganda, and it ain't even happen like that. The Royal Libraries will tell you that. The Royal Archives will tell you that. We've been showing this in history. So you have to be like, well, what if that ain't happen like that, what else not true? All of it ain't true. And it's no disrespect. You've been replaced. And if the European scholar tell you, and nobody should be more credible than your own brother that can tell you from scholarship that done the work just as much as more as the other individual, especially if they're lower level Masons. I don't care if they a misnomer black Mason or a misnomer white Mason. It's no disrespect when they be acting like what science, what books. Man, every scholar that you had, if I talk about Godfrey Higgins, they know who Godfrey Higgins is. If I talk about Albert Churchward and Gerald Massey, they know who Gerald Massey is. They know it. They know the European Mason that clearly tell you, ask them, are they a son of a Muslim? Yes. Now, what's the problem is the misnomer black man to say he's a widow's son, and that's the problem. That's a misunderstanding. That's a misunderstanding. Now we can break it down to make it sound good in a certain way, but from logically, it's a misunderstanding. You know, and biblically, we can show some things if we want to talk about it in that manifestation biblically, historically. That's why when people be having discussions and they just want to say and just go to a writing and say what Jesus is love. I didn't say that, but I'm talking about, okay, well, what about you and I? What about the history of things? When people be saying bloodlines and the genealogy of Yahshua the Messiah, well, okay, well, let's deal with it. Because they say we're straight from the tribe of Judah. Let's see where that come from. Let's see who Ruth the Moabitess and Tamar. Let's see when they talk about Mary, the mother of Jesus. Let's see that genealogy. Let's see what's the Bible talk about. Let's trace it. And then it don't take no scholar. You can get any Bible and look in the Bible, the King James Bible, get that map, and then you see the 12 tribes, what people want to call it, and see what is that so-called 12 tribe really showing you on the map. And see, and this is the history of things. If the Jews ruled Spain for 800 years, right? If the Jews ruled Spain for 800 years, who were the Jews? They were Moors. The king of the Jews. Now, in Hebrew, just like we're Moor, when we say Moor, yes, we Moor, but the ish of Moor, okay, I give it in both connotations and in both descriptions. Blackish, you can be black-ish. You might not be black, watch the flip, but you have some of the attitude, the swag. You might dress blackish, or in the context of Moorish, you Moor, but the ish is your culture, the things you wear. Now, can a European Jew, because it is European Jews? I mean, I get the encyclopedia and tell you what Edom and tell you what they are and what they mean. I can get the Jewish encyclopedia and tell you where, no disrespect, where the phrase anti-Semitic came from and who made it up, the history of it, you know? But when we talk about things, and you have to look at words and be like, wait a minute, Hebrew, Jew, Jewish, the language Yiddish, you start looking at things and then you be like, well, wait a minute, it's no disrespect. So if a person say bloodline and things don't matter, okay, what's the genealogy of Yahshua the Messiah? We ain't talking about no Greek mythology, no disrespect. When people try to say this, that, and the other, we're not talking about no Greek mythology. But what's the genealogy of Yahshua the Messiah? If they say they were Hebrew, they were over in a certain area of the continent of the world. What was there? But then what you get there, it don't matter. Okay, then let's go to history. If you say Black Lives Matter and reparations, now we got to deal with both, because what was taken from slaves is the two that I'm talking about, which is your nationality and your spirituality, which connects the two to make you a five, to make you, your divine nationality, to make you a complete fifth. Now, who say it don't matter? Today, if you say misnomer Black Lives Matter, who's to say that if you can't connect yourself to the world and history and the biblical text and it don't matter and say it's all fake? It can be. And this, when we talk about a genealogy, we're talking about a family, not a minority of people. That's why, like, it's no disrespect. You're not the same. If science will say that when they say you are African American, but I say what makes you a Moorish American because you're born here in America with African, aka Moroccan descent. That's what I mean. And a percentage of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans. In modern humans, that's why they say, what is a human? You know, what is a human? Is zero. Then they say close to zero, but then they play again because they want to be politically correct. You know it's zero. And people from African populations. And people from African populations. So just like the SF-181 form we're talking about, you got to know who you are. You have zero blood, especially the Africans, the Moroccans, whatever you want to call it, you know, in that area, because it's telling you. And then they say, and it's about 1 to 2% in people of European or Asian background. The percentage of Denisovan DNA is the highest in the in Melanesian population, 46%. Lower in other Southeast Asia and Pacific Islander populations, and very low or undetectable elsewhere in the world. Neanderthals were very early, archaic humans who lived in Europe and West Asia from about 400,000 years ago. This was from this time until, not this time, but when it was written, until they became extinct about 40,000 years ago. Denisovans are another population of early humans who lived in Asia and were distantly related to Neanderthals. Much less is known about the Denisovans because scientists have uncovered fewer fossils of these ancient people. The precise way that modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans are related is still under study. But I gotta find that book. Because I got that book about the Denisovans. I gotta find that in my library because it's some science on it. And it ain't no disrespect. Especially when somebody want to try to say you a monkey. And no, you're not. No, you're not. You ain't evolved from no monkey. How could you evolve from a monkey and a monkey is still a monkey? You ain't evolved from no monkey. A monkey is a monkey. And see, we got to start from that. We are from God. We created in the image of the Creator. It ain't no disrespect when people say, well, we not God. Okay, well, we created in the image of the Creator. I'm not saying we not the God, but you are God because you created in the image of the Creator. You can dream things. You can make things happen. Yes, we created in the image. We created in the image. You're not a breed or nothing like that. You're not no genetic or this or come from nothing like that or come from something other than the Creator. Because that's what people, they want you to feel bad. And when you can deal with science, now you ask a person, say, well, I don't have any Neanderthal blood in my veins. Because you don't. Historically, when we talk about law, you're not no Negro, black, or color, or African American. It's going to have to come to the point where we let that religious stuff slide by the waist and do what our prophet said. What? Understanding our nationality and our spirituality is the same. Nobody's dissing your culture. Because when you understand the science, you understand monotheism, you understand who you are. You have a real concept of what's going on, and it becomes real. It becomes real. You start dealing with history, law, and civics, it becomes real. You have the right to be a people. You start connecting the Declaration of Human Rights, Article 15. You have a right of a nationality and a right to change it. And the claim of child replaces the birth certificate. And no one will be arbitrarily denied of a nationality and a right to change it. You will understand what the SF-181 form is. You understand what the religious rights of the indigenous people consist of. You'll understand what the House Joint Resolution 75, where you have the right to annex your L and your Bay. You will understand all this in the history books where this is who you are. This is who you are. Empress Ghasna El Bay, you know, of the Yahamadai Moors, you know, Empress Ghasna El Bay. When you think that the Louisiana Purchase was purchased, and people be all about people begging, no, it ain't. That was stolen land. Research the history, how that land was given back in the 1990s. Research history. Nobody's trying to be no sovereign citizen to do that. We don't promulgate that crap here, that criminal behavior. But we tell it is in history. You have the right to be who you are, and no one can arbitrarily explain who you are. No one has the right to tell you who you are, and it don't matter. And you can't speak on who you are. Yes, you can. And that's why I be telling people we have to refrain from talking with somebody else who they are and worried about who they are, because you know who they are. You know science can prove who that, but who are you? You can stand strong. You can wear your hairdress and your fez, you know, and be righteous and understand some things historically, you know, because it is a Masonic secret. It is. And people are still subjugated mentally, educational wise. Just like he was talking about how even in a house market of how the ghettos and all that stuff and cheap housing wasn't for misnomer black people at first. You see that. You see all this stuff in history. Even when I talk about the Homestead Act. So when I'm talking about coming together and doing it the right way, the only thing we're supposed to have is our churches and our schools, and make sure our people that's teaching will be able to do this. And it's no disrespect to no one. It's time, man. And like I said, it's not even being taught in schools and universities. And I graduate, I got to do a master's degree and pursuing more. And I've done oral dissertations. You know, it's a lot to bring back to our brothers and sisters, especially historically and biblically, because my degree's in first century history and religion and Christian education. My education is that I have to be able to decipher this and break this down. It's so many books and manuscripts. When people be upset, I said, well, man, well, I have that too. What about the Septuagint? I have all that too. Want to talk about it? Want to talk about who are the real Jews and who wrote things? I don't care if it was Greek, you know. And if Jews, if the Jews ruled Spain for 800 years, who was the Jews? Think about these things. When people talk about the reference, the scholarship, we've been given a scholarship and a reference forever. We have a whole library. That's what the brother in Baltimore, the minister, what I was showing you the other day in class, how our kids can't read. You know? And the reason why a lot of them, were they not interested in, because look what they reading. Look what they being forced to read still in schools and in history. Christopher Columbus, some damn church war. Those ain't no heroes. Mussolini, those ain't no heroes. Those ain't no heroes. They talk about Abraham Lincoln. Well, tell your kids to write about Abraham Lincoln when he defended the Moore in court. Tell them to write about the Spencer and Dungy case. Tell your kids to write about the Wilmington white man's constitution, where they overthrew the misnomer black people out of North Carolina because they didn't want to be rude or have no Negroes to be governing them. Let's talk about some real history. Let's talk about a whole bunch of modern stuff where we can show, when people say, well, it don't matter, we can prove that who you are through the biblical scriptures, through history, ancient and modern. When David McRitchie talked about the ancient and modern Britons, he didn't say the ancient and modern blacks, he said the ancient and modern Britons. You know who that is. When Vladimir Ivanov, Russian icons, not no ancient blacks, the Russian icons, who was in Russia? Alex Pushkins and more. Mozart, we know this. How can it be some type of hate or disrespect when no one won't tell history, and the first century writers will say, well, what about this? What about all these people in first century? What about these brothers during this time? What about Vladimir Dale definition of an Arab? A-R-A-P, not A-R-A-B. And then they try to take things off the internet, because you could be able to find Vladimir dictionary, because I did a whole lecture on it in the college. The information was available on Oxford library, because that's where I got it from. And then a lot of stuff is obsolete, but I got the dictionary. And Vladimir Dale, a European, Russian, back then telling you what the true Arab, A-R-A-P, consists of. And people be all mad and upset. It's like, how you going to get mad? How you going to get mad? You reference him, say he's a scholar and all this. Well, let's see what he say the Arab is, or the ancient Arab. The ancient Arab to the real Arab. Not you, not nobody else. That's pale, no disrespect. And that's why I said things was taken over, man. And it's no disrespect to no one. Just like I said, when we talk about the sources, I done gave so many references. When I talk about Bertram Thomas wrote the book called The Arab. All these references I've been given, and these are European references. Gerald Massey, you know, Godfrey Higgins. All you got to do is get Godfrey Higgins. And then if I go get the book, and then I reference all the first century Europeans, scholars that told who was the figures biblically and who was the kings and all this, and you can find them in these libraries in Europe and all these other libraries. Like when I said when Judah had 3 names, you can find all this stuff. You see, from scholarship. So I hope everybody, man, come to class and learn, man. This is what it's for. The internet is a good thing when we use it in the right way. We can reach people from all over, you know, and our goal is to have our brick and mortar, but it does take the people, you know, and we don't have to be worrying about what a person's saying and is it facts. We're going to have the facts. We're going to do the scholarship, you know. We're going to raise our kids up the right way. We're going to be able to do some things the right way, especially when we come together. When 2 or more gather, there is the Holy Spirit. So I give y'all gratitude for taking time out y'all day, man, for watching these films, man. Please come to class, support our temple and school. If you haven't subscribed to our temple and school, on YouTube, it's Burning Bush Tabernacle Science Temple and School, also on Facebook. And if you're looking for a fez, turban, etc., check us out at morrishaberdasher.com. If you're looking for any books, PDF download, that's expensive, or just regular books, my PDF books, that's books with a Z. And if you're looking for any books to be bound and printed, that's expensive and rare, please check out bindedbooks.com. Check that out, man. I'm telling you. And if you need anything and you go on my company page, you might not have the funds for that. All you got to do is hit me up. We can work something out. I want to share this with you. That's why I'm here in ministry. In ministry, that's when we do things together. You know, I build your library up. You be able to come to class. I give gifts. If you don't know how to tie your turban, I'll show you how to tie your turban. If you don't have a fez, you can get a fez and get the wisdom to know who you are as a people. And then we can start making the change and teaching the change. And you can see righteous people doing righteous things. Instead of putting everybody in a so-called box when you just watching the internet. When people watching these misnomer black people, sovereign citizens begging, doing things the wrong way. And they go to jail just like the European militia. These Negroes out here playing fake G.I. Joe. And we not no sovereign citizens. That's an oxymoron. We don't do that. I'm proud to be an American. What type of American I am? A Moorish American. I don't want to expatriate no de facto government. When you talk about you going to expatriate for some de facto government, then when you do that, who are you affiliated with? You are a domestic terrorist, foreign and abroad. None of these goofy Negroes have no passport or no allegiance with no other country or nothing. So when you be listening to these people on the internet that just playing and want to make a quick dollar, talk about they got some travel ID, some Moorish ID, you ain't did nothing but waste your money with some cosmetics. Come learn the right way and do things the right way. And with that, I say peace, light, and illumination.